What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And free agency is still quite a ways away, but honestly, it's right around the corner. This offseason's going to fly by like it does every single year, and it's time to take a look at some of these free agents who might be available for the New York Giants. In particular, today, we're going to be looking at the wide receiver position. There's a lot of wide receivers set to hit this open market this season, guys. Like a lot of talent out there, and at different price points as well. So we're going to go through the different price points, look at some guys on the cheaper end, then get those mid-level guys, and then take a look at if the Giants wanted to make a splash at the wide receiver position in free agency, who's available, who could they target, and how would they fit in with this New York Giants team. That's what we're going to dive into in today's episode. But before we do so, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode, subscribe to the channel if you are new, ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topics down below in the comment section. If you listen on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And I want to get your take on my first potential option. I'm going to pitch this guy to you right here. He's a cheaper option. Projected market value according to SpotRack, $5.6 million. I'm talking about Noah Brown from the Houston Texans. Had a really good season in 2022 with the Dallas Cowboys, put up about 550 yards. This past season with the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud, put up about 550 yards, same amount of touchdowns again this year, but in 7 less games. He missed 7 weeks this season with a shoulder injury on injured reserve, but in those 10 games was looking like a bona fide number 2 wide receiver. Really good player, but again, because of injuries, lack of consistency throughout his career, going to come in at a very cheap price point, under $6 million per season most likely. So I want to get your take on Noah Brown and maybe hear some other options that you think the Giants could pursue on that lower end of the free agent wide receiver market.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually looking up some information before, and I realized that Kenny Golladay did not play football last year, and we were paying him $17 million in 2022, and then he ended up not playing a snap. Like, Giants, guys, that's Giants football. This is what the Giants do to people. We sign them, and they end up retiring after, like, I can't do this anymore. But look, looking at the wide receiver class now, we can't make the same mistake where we signed Paris Campbell to a 1-year incentive-laden deal and then not use him. We can't afford to just be paying people to sit on the bench. And look, I actually like the Paris Campbell signing. I think that we did not figure out how to operate this offense at all. We had an idea of what we wanted it to look like. It all fell apart at the seams. And obviously, we decided to give those opportunities to Wan'Dale Robinson, and he became more of the focal point out of the slot. And Paris Campbell was basically pushed to the side as we tried to develop guys like Jalen Hyatt and give Darius Slayton more opportunities. But Noah Brown's an interesting player. This year, guys, you may not know this, he had 172 yards in one game against Cincinnati, a win, 30-27 in, I don't know, maybe it was week like 7 or 8 or something like that. 172 yards, but that doesn't stop just right there. The next week, he had 153 yards on 6 receptions against Tampa Bay in a 39-37 win. This dude actually is not a bad player. As you said, kind of injured this season. He obviously was with Dallas for a long time. We saw him a couple times, but he never really latched on. Played 13 games for Dallas last year at 555 yards and 3 touchdowns. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb is the primary guy. They only really throw it to him and tight ends. So, like, Michael Gallup is a ghost out there. Have you ever bet on him in sports? If you ever sports bet on him, like a player prop, you're going to lose that bet, guaranteed. He does not catch the football, and he does not get any looks. But Noah Brown kind of fell to the same fate. Like CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson or whoever the hell, Dalton Schultz, a couple of years ago, those are the guys that go to. They don't really use anybody else, and then they use the run game with Tony Pollard, obviously. But Noah Brown went to get more of an opportunity with Houston. I don't think Houston realized that Tank Dell and Nico Collins were going to be such impactful players for them, and Noah Brown got kind of forgotten about again. But there was a couple games there. I think Tank Dell missed some time, and maybe Collins missed a game here or there, and Brown excelled. He was the focal point, and he got fed. He had a game that 172 yard performance. He had 7 catches on 8 targets. The game after, 6 receptions on 6 targets. Like, he hauls in a lot of passes. So that's certainly something to be intrigued by. He had a 60% catch rate this past season. So, cheap option, a guy that has had some big games. I don't see why you can't utilize someone like this, 6'2", 215, great size. Probably going to be more of an affordable, as you said, more of on the cheaper end. Now, a lot of mock drafts, we'll talk about this tomorrow. Daniel Jeremiah just had his mock draft drop where the Giants landed Malik Neighbors. I think the Giants should draft a second round receiver anyway. There's tons of receivers in the NFL that have developed into WR1s. Of course, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf. How many guys out in the second round have become legitimate stars in this league? The Giants can find one in this draft class. This draft class at receiver is incredibly deep, and Anthony, you say it all the time. This group is going to be something special, and the Giants could land someone in the second round that has that level of upside. We'll see what happens, but Noah Brown is a complementary piece, a guy you can put on the outside, got some size, win those 50-50 battles, really solid after the catch, good athleticism on a cheap price tag. I don't see why the Giants shouldn't do that. This wide receiver class is a little bit weak, to say the least. There are some big splashy players. We'll talk about them, but they're going to be highly sought after, and their price tags are going to raise because of that. Just simple supply and demand. 2025, that draft class, or rather that free agency class, is crazy. I don't even think most of them will actually hit the open market, but you're talking about CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson hitting the open market. Neither of them are going to do that, though. They're going to be franchise tagged or given long-term deals, so pretty much rule them out now. But we'll see about Michael Pittman, we're going to talk about in a second. But yeah, I actually do like the Noah Brown concept. I think this is a decent player, cheaper, has had some big games when he's healthy, and can be a nice complementary piece. He could probably compete with Isaiah Hodgins for a roster spot, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and a couple other tidbits that I want to throw out there for Noah Brown. So as you mentioned, this is a cheaper option, and I want to discuss these cheaper options for the Giants, not always just take a look at those big, flashy splash players, because first of all, those are usually unrealistic to acquire. A lot of them don't even hit the open market, but these cheaper options make more sense for the Giants if they do decide to go into the 2024 NFL draft and take a wide receiver early. Because like you said, upside, I thought that was a great word to use to describe this wide receiver class, because there's so much upside all over the place, especially in that second round. Giants have 2 second-round draft picks. I think that they would be missing a massive opportunity if they didn't utilize one of those 2 draft picks at the wide receiver position, because there's going to be so much talent in that round at that spot. So I think that a wide receiver will be the move with one of those 2 second-round picks. So if that's the case, if the Giants are planning on bringing in kind of a higher-end draft prospect at the position, then they don't want to go ahead and splash too hard on wide receivers in free agency. They're going to want to target some of these more low-key signings and efficient guys like a Noah Brown, who, and this is the point that I want to mention, averaged 17.2 yards per reception this season. That's impressive. That's really, really high. 17.2 yards per reception on a 60% catch rate. That's really, really impressive from Noah Brown. So an efficient player and a big play generator. And I think that's where he's really exciting. And like I mentioned, a $5.6 million market value according to SpotRack, according to Pro Football Focus, a $3.5 million average annual market value. So this is a cheap option. This is a guy that the Giants can go out there, can target, can sign to a really inexpensive deal, and flesh out their offensive weaponry. And I think that this would be a good option for a young quarterback or a veteran quarterback like a Daniel Jones. I think Noah Brown just makes a ton of sense. He's one of those big play, dependable wide receivers that can give you 550 yards in a season. That's kind of what I would project for him, and I think that's something that the Giants should be looking for. But kind of moving up a little bit, you've got other guys out there. Josh Reynolds, he's going to be 29 next season. He's projected to get something in the $5 million range. You've got a guy like Michael Thomas, who at one point in his career was elite. Now he's only worth $8 million per season, 30 years old. That's one of your middle range guys, I would say. But another mid-range guy that I really do want to key in on, Alex, there's actually 2 of them that I want to talk about. First one is Curtis Samuel, Washington Commanders player. If you remember a few seasons ago when Dave Gettleman was still the GM, there was a lot of talk about the Giants being interested in Curtis Samuel because he had that connection from the days with the Panthers. But Samuel went on to sign elsewhere in the NFC East with the Washington Commanders, but this is a player that I really like because he really fits that Brian Dable mold. He's a similar player to guys that we have on this roster, like a Wan'Dale Robinson, where he can play a lot in the slot, can move around all over the offense, even take a lot of snaps out of the backfield and be pretty efficient as a runner. So with a projected market value, according to Pro Football Focus, of $9 million per season, I think that Curtis Samuel makes sense. That's not really expensive at the wide receiver spot. Once we get to those splash options, we're talking at least double the price tag for some of those higher end options. But I think a guy like Curtis Samuel does make plenty of sense for the New York Giants as one of those versatile pieces, Alex. So I want to quickly hear your thoughts on him, and then I have a couple other guys that I want to dive into.
Yeah, I actually like the Curtis Samuel concept because he's quite versatile. In fact, I kind of feel like he's what we wanted to do with Paris Campbell. We talked about Paris Campbell's pass as like a runner, as a running back, he could out of the slot and maybe move him outside, get him in jet sweeps. We did none of those things, which is, just another testament to how unfortunate our offensive scheme looked last year. We did not get really creative at times. Maybe it was personnel, maybe it was injury based, but Curtis Samuel's a pretty solid vet player, 27 years old, former second round pick out of Ohio State, fast dude, 4.3 40. He's got some strength to him. Again, Washington, also a really bad offense, but this is a guy you could scheme open and get the ball to. Interestingly, I'm looking at his receiving depth from this past season. Behind the line of scrimmage, he caught 16 or 15 passes, and each one of those that he averaged 5.8 yards per reception. That's pretty solid from catching passes behind the line of scrimmage. So they give him a couple screen passes. He did some good work with those. 50.6% of his targets came from the short range, 0 to 9 yards from the line of scrimmage. He had 197 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he got a lot of work in the medium, 10 to 19 yards away from the line of scrimmage. 190 yards and a touchdown, 61% catch rate, and downfield had a couple opportunities and, made some plays happen. I do think this is a decent player. I do think that he's got versatility. He's got good size. He's shifty. Why not consider this as an option? I don't think the Giants should be out there signing WR1s, but Curtis Samuel can be like a nice utility man, a nice kind of gadget, but also you can use him as, a de facto WR2. I wouldn't say he has WR2 like stats, but again, Washington kind of makes everybody look bad. Same with the Giants. So, I'll say this. Like Darius Slayton, most would say he puts up WR2 numbers on a yearly basis, and we barely ever get him the ball, it seems like. But Curtis Samuel, I think he could be a nice piece. Like you surround a quarterback with, Jalen Hyatt, Wandale, Curtis Samuel, and Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins, and maybe you draft a guy like Brian Thomas or Keon Coleman. I don't know if he'll be there in the second round, probably not. Or Xavier Legette. Like there's some good options here. Malachi Corley. Like maybe you find one of those type of guys. I know, Anthony, you have your preferences in the second round there, but that's a decent, you maybe don't have your superstar WR1, but you have some developmental pieces that are working their way up and a nice core of receivers that can get open and do some stuff for you, attack the deeper portions of the field, shorter concepts, obviously with Wandale. You have a nice blend of talent that you can utilize in all portions of the field. So I think like that's not a bad way to like smooth over not having a WR1. And for what it's worth, Anthony, I'll point to a team that doesn't have a WR1 that routinely has one of the best offenses in football year in and year out. You probably know who it is. It's the Chiefs. Who makes that thing run? It's a really great scheme, and it's Patrick Mahomes. They have the worst receiving core I've seen in a long time this year. I mean, Rashee Rice is like their leading receiver, and he's a rookie. So you kind of look at what the Giants have. I could argue they have a better receiving core than the Chiefs. We just don't have the quarterback nor the scheme to actually maximize them. So with that being said, like I would love a WR1, but a group of really solid receivers, you could start there and then build your way up to finding that top guy, and then figure out whatever the quarterback position is gonna entail. A lot's gonna unfold there. We'll see what happens, but I don't hate the idea of Curtis Samuel on this offense and him kind of elevating everybody, because I do think he's someone you do have to pay attention to, and he can make you hurt, man, if you leave him open.
Yeah, and a couple more tidbits on Curtis Samuel. I do think he is a true number 2 wide receiver. If you look at his numbers throughout his career, 2020 he had 850 yards in his final season with Carolina. Then he was injured his first year with Washington, but back-to-back seasons with at least 68% catch rate and over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns in each of those seasons. That is a true number 2 wide receiver in my eyes. And the thing that I love about Curtis Samuel, he's consistent with those numbers. He's got 600 yards or more in every full season that he's played since 2019. Again, 2021 he was hurt. And his career catch rate is 65.4%. So a lot of that is because he catches many of those screen passes that you mentioned. Easy, quick hitters, behind the line of scrimmage, run upfield, make some plays. But the Giants don't have a lot of those run after the catch guys right now. Curtis Samuel could be one of those guys, add an extra element to this offense. And again, having a high catch rate, he's a dependable player and he's a consistent player. So I think he makes a lot of sense for a New York Giants offense, which lacked consistency and lacked dependability. So Curtis Samuel to me does make sense on one of those mid-range affordable contracts. I want to mention 3 other players, or I'm going to go through 2 players, Alex, and I want to get your really quick opinion on these 2 guys, and then there's one other mid-range guy that we can talk about more in depth. First one is OBJ. He's going to be a free agent again. I know a lot of Giants fans would love to see the reunion. I would, just because of the story. However, I'm going to go ahead and quickly say there's certain players who have a name attached to them, and that drives up their price. I don't think that the Giants are kind of in the market to be buying name brand, buying OBJ brand. And that's a guy who's going to command over $10 million per season, probably, simply because his name is Odell Beckham Jr. And he was a huge component of the Ravens offense this year, and the Ravens might go on to win a Super Bowl. They're a pretty damn good team. That's another factor that's going to bolster OBJ's price this upcoming offseason. If he plays well in the postseason, maybe in a Super Bowl, again, his price goes up. So I don't think that OBJ is going to be a realistic option for the Giants as badly as I want him to be, because I want him back in Big Blue, and I think he never should have been sent away. I just don't think it's a realistic option, so I'm going to throw that out there, Giants fans. But then another player that I want to mention, Alex, Tyler Boyd. He's 29 now. He's not the same player that he was. He just had a really bad year in Cincinnati this past season, but they had a lot of problems on offense, a lot of injuries, slow start to the year. Tyler Boyd kind of phased out of the offense in some way, but throughout his career, always been a really consistent, dependable, middle of the field guy. Like, I've always really liked Tyler Boyd as that slot receiver that kind of runs your route in the middle of the field. You know he's open, kind of your security blanket underneath that's not a tight end. You can have your tight end who's a security blanket, but if you want like a dependable, great route runner, intermediate receiver, I think Tyler Boyd makes a lot of sense. So I want to quickly get your take on those two guys, Alex, OBJ, Tyler Boyd, whether or not you think OBJ will even be an option for the Giants and what you think of Tyler Boyd. And then I want to dive into a little bit more depth on another mid-range guy after those two.
Yeah, I mean, look, OBJ, we know OBJ. I don't think a reunion's coming there anytime soon. I think, he still likes to get his bag, and he's having a decent season with the Ravens. I think we go younger personally. I don't think it's worth going down that road. He still gets injured pretty frequently, and he wants targets. You know what I mean? Like, he's in a scheme that doesn't really favor receivers, but OBJ always commands targets, and I don't think we don't have the target share to give him. I think I prefer to feed guys like Wandale, Jalen Hyatt, and Slayton over OBJ, and I don't want him to get frustrated because we're just not focusing on him. I think he would end up just being running cardio most of the time, at a little bit more of an expensive price than I'd be happy with. Tyler Boyd, also, you said, coming off a pretty down season in his context. Still 29 years old, 667 yards and 2 touchdowns this year. Obviously, not that bad. DJ Shark is another guy, like, low key. I like DJ Shark. Why? He's in a really bad Carolina offense. He has 525 yards and 5 touchdowns this year. In an offense that actually gets the ball out and isn't really that's like one of the worst offenses I think we've seen in a long time in Carolina. And DJ Shark has managed to have a little bit of success there. So maybe, and he's 27, he's still young. Like, maybe we can get him on a pretty cheap deal. Veteran, experienced. I don't hate that move. Has some good size to him. Fast. Like, I like that type of signing, like low key. Again, these are not WR1 signings, guys. These are like getting over the hump signings. These are like trying to like piece together a competent group that if someone goes down, we have other guys to fill in and take over that role. I do like DJ Shark as an option. I'm kind of just like reading off. Like, I like Josh Reynolds from Detroit. He's underrated, 608 yards and 5 touchdowns. They have a lot of talent over there in Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously Jameson Williams. They have some really good players. Josh Reynolds actually was on the Giants practice squad, I believe, a couple years back. Decent player. He makes catches downfield too, which I like about him. So that's an option. We'll dive into the WR1s of the class. Like, again, fringe WR1s, but they have that upside. I'll kind of let you start off with the one that you had. Like, this will probably be the second, if not most expensive of the bunch.
Well, before I get to him,
Okay.
there's another player that I want to talk about in that middle range that I think makes a lot of sense for the Giants. It's
Who's
Gabe
that?
Davis. So,
right.
of course, we know
Okay.
Gabe Davis is going to be a free agent this offseason. Not his best season this year with the Buffalo Bills, but he's had really good seasons in the past. He's only going to be 25 this upcoming season, so he's the youngest out of all these guys that we've mentioned. Gabe Davis is the youngest. His best seasons were under Brian Daboll with the Buffalo Bills a couple seasons ago as the offensive coordinator, so I do want to get your take on that. His projected market value is around $12 to $13 million on a one-year contract. So, again, you are talking about paying a little bit more, paying up quite a bit compared to these other older players that we mentioned, these veterans. But as a younger guy coming off a rookie contract, Gabe Davis has proven to be a home run hitter, a big play specialist, and a guy who can play on the outside. I think that he makes a lot of sense for a potential reunion with Brian Dable, but I do want to hear your take on it before we dive into those upper echelon players, like I mentioned. But Gabe Davis, again, I think just that connection with Brian Dable makes a lot of sense, and he is a pretty dependable and consistent player year in and year out. Makes a lot of big plays for the Buffalo Bills. Now, do the Giants have the offense that can hit those home runs and hit Gabe Davis and get the most out of him? Not right now, but if they draft a quarterback who steps in and has a really prolific rookie season, then maybe they do. Or maybe Brian Dable takes more of a control on the offense and it maximizes guys like Gabe Davis and they do take more shots. Those are possibilities. So I see an avenue where Gabe Davis could be signed on a relatively inexpensive contract, one of those mid-level guys, and really make an impact. So, Alex, I'm curious to know how you feel about a potential reunion with Gabe Davis and Brian Dable.
I'm not the biggest fan of Gabe Davis personally. I think, he really excels in the deeper portions of the field. It's really, if you watch him in his production, most of the time, it's Josh Allen running around and then launching a 60-yard pass to Gabe Davis, like wide open in the end zone. Like that's a lot of his production. The Giants aren't going to replicate that. If you're looking for a guy that is getting open because of his route running and his tangible qualities and like his ability as a receiver, I don't think Gabe Davis is the right fit for you. I think that ultimately when you look at Gabe Davis, you have a quarterback who gets out of the pocket. He's a Caleb Williams receiver, right? Like he's the type of guy that, Caleb Williams will be running around playing off script and find Gabe Davis downfield for like 45-yard gain. Like that's the way I see him. I don't think we have that. I don't think Gabe Davis is a great fit for us personally. I wouldn't spend that money. That's my personal opinion. I think we need guys that generate separation, work a little bit more on timing routes, because we cannot bank on our offensive line to stay upright. We cannot bank on our offensive line to actually like protect our quarterback just yet. Hopefully we can in the future. And with that in mind and anticipating that, we can't expect us to be maximizing Gabe Davis. I think it'd be another kind of Kenny Golladay situation personally.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid take. I mean, he's not one of those polished route runners, dependable guys. He is one of those home run hitters. Like you mentioned, Josh Allen runs around for 5 minutes and finds Gabe Davis downfield. The Giants don't really have that offense, and they won't unless they move up to number one and draft a quarterback like a Caleb Williams who does those kind of things. But that's not really what I envision for the New York Giants. I don't think that Gabe Davis makes sense in that regard. But again, I think he's a guy to keep an eye on because of the connection to Brian Dable. But now let's go ahead and move into that upper echelon and talk about some of these splash wide receiver signings that might make sense for the Giants. Now, of course, the first one that I want to talk about, if you guys have been viewing this channel or listening to it for a very long time, you know that I've always been really high on Michael Pittman Jr. I thought that he was a stud coming out of USC. I thought he was a prospect that should have been drafted really early in that draft class. He went in the second round to the Indianapolis Colts, and he quickly blossomed into their number one wide receiver. He's had 1,000 yards in 2 of his 4 career seasons, and he's really established himself as one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Now, he is projected to be a free agent this offseason. Whether or not he hits the open market remains to be seen. Very good chance that the Colts and Pittman Jr. get a deal done ahead of time, like as well for the Cincinnati Bengals and T. Higgins, who we'll mention. But Michael Pittman Jr., I think, does make sense for the Giants because he is one of those dependable separators that you just mentioned, Alex. Like, he does fit in because he gets open. He runs really good routes, and he is strong at the catch point. He can make contested catches and help you in that regard as well. Middle of the field, this guy is always open, seemingly, making big-time grabs, putting up 1,000 yards, and really just being that man in the offense for the Indianapolis Colts, really their engine, and he's only 26 years old. So if the Giants were to sign him, you are talking probably 4 years, $22 to $24 million per season. He's going to be a top 10 highest paid player at the position if he hits the open market and gets a contract with another team. It's probably unlikely that happens, but if he is on the open market, Alex, I'm curious to know, do you want the Giants to pursue this guy? Or if it's T. Higgins, if you prefer T. Higgins, if one of those two guys hits the open market, should the Giants be dabbling in that upper echelon and going after a WR1? Or like you mentioned earlier, do you think that they're better off holding on to that money, spending it elsewhere, and maybe trying to hit on a wide receiver in the NFL draft?
Listen, I'm out on T. Higgins personally. I think that he played second fiddle to Jamar Chase, and there's a reason for that. I mean, Jamar Chase is that's a WR1. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason that Jamar Chase is the guy they throw the ball all the time to, and T. Higgins was a forgotten asset because they don't see T. Higgins as equivalent to Jamar Chase. And if he's not equivalent to Jamar Chase, he is not a WR1. That's my opinion personally. I don't want to go that route. I really, really like Michael Pittman, actually. I think that he is such a great player that is super underutilized in the Colts offense, mainly because, I mean, they had Anthony Richardson, who is obviously going to be a little bit more of a running quarterback to start his career and maybe more erratic as a passer because of his completion percentage was very spotty in college. We'll see what happens in the future. I think he's really talented. It could be something special. But, Gardner Minshew's average, right? Like, he's not going to maximize the WR1 to that level, but Michael Pittman still put together a pretty damn solid season, 1,152 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's a good player out of USC, and he's 26 years old. Like, that's the type of talent you invest in. You know what I mean? Young, he's a leader, he's a good dude, he's got upside. We haven't seen his full potential because he's been working with poor offenses the last 2 years, 3 years even. Matt Ryan's offense with the Colts was god-awful. So, like, we haven't, and he's still putting over 1,000 yards up. Like, I think that's actually a good investment. Michael Pittman could be something really, really good. And I think he's a good separator. He's got good hands. He's not afraid to take a hit. I know you guys saw that hit he took a couple weeks ago where his neck, I mean, I thought he got decapitated. Dude got absolutely destroyed, but, got back up, walked off the field. He missed the next day, I think, through a missed game because of a concussion, but otherwise he's a tough dude. And, if the Giants want to spend big at receiver and don't allocate a draft pick toward it, I really like Michael Pittman. He would be 4 years, like 4-year deal. He's in his prime. He's young. Like, that's the type of guy I think you invest in for the long term. But again, who knows if he even is allowed to walk? They could tag him. And at the same time, really good receiver class this year in the draft. And in the next year's free agency class is ridiculously stacked, depending on if anyone actually hits the open market. So love Pittman, great player. Love to have him on the Giants. I don't know if it's even realistic, but, $22 million per season. Again, Anthony, every one of these big contracts, Bryce Huff, Danielle Hunter, whatever it might be, it all comes down to whether or not the Giants are going to take the out in Daniel Jones contract. If they don't take the out, you can kiss anybody worth over $20 million goodbye. It's not happening. It just doesn't make any sense. So if they take the out in the contract, I see it as a possibility. And if they do sign one of these big deals, I think it'll kind of, the writing will be on the wall on what the future of this team looks like.
I think so too, and I'll give my take on Michael Pittman and the possibility of investing in a top wide receiver. Personally, I'm not for it. I'm actually rather against it. That's why I was more interested in discussing a lot of those low-key guys, and I really wanted to dive into those guys in this episode. Like, we talked about a lot of those fringe WR2/3 guys. We talked about some of those established WR2 guys that maybe could take a jump to a WR1. But these bona fide superstar number one wide receivers, first of all, it's so rare that they hit the open market. To expect a Michael Pittman Jr. to be available in free agency, you're kidding. I mean, it's so rare that those guys actually become available. And so Michael Pittman Jr., while I would love for him to be a New York Giant, I just don't think it's going to be a realistic option for the Giants. And furthermore, I don't think that they can afford him because of the Daniel Jones contract, and I don't think that they would be wise to tie up more money to top-end players like that. I think what the Giants need and now is a bona fide WR1 on a rookie contract, and the only way that they get that, they hit on a draft pick in the first 2 rounds. Now, again, they don't have to go number 6 overall. They don't have to go with Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze to find a WR1 in this draft class. There's a lot of talent here. And like you mentioned, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf. You can go around the league. Brandon Ayuk was an end of the first round pick. It doesn't have to be in the top 10. You think around all over the NFL, there's so many wide receivers that are drafted. I mean, even Michael Pittman Jr. is like the answer staring us in the face right here. So many wide receivers go in round 2, become number 1 wide receivers. So for me, the New York Giants, what they need to do is try to identify that guy in this year's draft class. And I know it's way easier said than done. And I'm not saying that it's just as easy as that guy's a WR1, draft him. I know it's not that easy. It's a crapshoot. It's the NFL draft. But the Giants need to make that a priority, is going into the draft and finally investing some of that draft capital into a high upside potential WR1. We talked about it all offseason long last year, how they were looking at all those guys, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston. I mean, he's not panning out in Los Angeles, but those other 2 guys look like they're pretty good, and they could be WR1s one day. Now, of course, I was in favor of going the cornerback route by the end of it, and I think Deonte Banks was the right pick. But this year, and coming around to this upcoming draft, I'm not saying that they got to go wide receiver at number 6, because you guys know where I stand on the quarterback debate. But in that second round, one of those 2 second-round picks that the Giants have, assuming they keep both of those picks, in my opinion, it is a necessity that they target a wide receiver with one of those 2 picks. The hit rate on second-round wide receivers is incredible. WR1s keep flying out of the second round of the draft year in and year out. If the New York Giants don't use one of those 2 picks on a wide receiver, they're playing themselves and they're foregoing a massive opportunity to find the great talent, especially in this year's draft class. It is loaded at the wide receiver position. There will be a guy who's drafted in round 2 that develops into a number 1 receiver in the NFL. I can guarantee that. So the Giants need to take advantage, and they do need to target a wide receiver in the second round if they hold on to both of those second round picks, in my opinion. So that's my reasoning as to why I'm out on any of these top receivers. If Mike Evans is on the open market, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, I don't care, guys. I'm just not in favor of spending all that money on those wide receivers. They can't afford to because of the Jones contract, and this is not the year to do it. With all of that talent in the NFL draft, that's where the New York Giants need to set their sights at the wide receiver position. Go find you a young player to develop into an absolute star for the next 5 to 10 seasons. That's what I'm hoping that they do. And again, the way they do that is in the NFL draft. So it's going to be interesting, of course. We're going to talk tomorrow about what if the Giants go wide receiver earlier in the draft. We're not talking second round, we're talking first round tomorrow. That's going to be an interesting topic of discussion. So make sure you stay tuned to Fireside Giants for that one as well. And make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topics down below in the comment section. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. But without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.